Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf Kuf Nun Zayin 157. We are at the Mishnah on the top of daf Kuf Nun Zayin 157, so 157a1. And it's introducing us to a new topic. So let's just get started. We'll jump right in. So let me share my screen and we will have the outline for you on screen. So, this Mishnah is going to address, as I mentioned at the end of the day yesterday in my teaser for today's daf, what happens if a house collapses on a father and son. Now, technically, it may make little difference in terms of an inheritance. Um, for the heirs, because in general they have very, very similar heirs, especially if the son has children, and let's say it was just one son and one father. So then again, those grandchildren of the father are going to inherit everything. But there's a key situation where it makes a humongous difference who dies first, and that is if the son has creditors. If the son has people whom he owes, well, then now all of a sudden it makes a humongous difference. Again, assuming he doesn't have enough to pay off. So if we imagine that situation, now we can understand why people will care who dies first. Because if the father dies first, now all of a sudden the son has plenty of assets. Whereas if the father died second and the son died first, well, when the son died, he had no assets, no ability to pay. The creditors get nothing. And then the heirs of the grandfather will collect everything.
I think it's the
So,
way it works today.
yeah, 100%. So that's the situation. So let's jump right in. Nafal habayis alav al aviv. A house fell on the son and on his father. Oh, or we can do a different situation, Allah Ba'al Morishab, or on him and anyone else who would cause him to inherit. Okay, V'haisa alav ksubas isha uvalchov, and he had a wife and creditors, and so Yorshei Ha'av Omrim, the heirs of the father, they respond and say, Haben meis rishon v'agakach meis ha'av. The son died first, and then the father died. Hachov omrim ha'av meis rishon v'agakach meis habein. No, it was the reverse order. So what happened? So before we do that, let's go through the Rashbam, the first four Rashbams on the daf, and we'll go through the details of the situation. So Nafal Abayis Alab al Aviv, Al Ruvain ve'al Yaakov. We'll call them Ruvain and Yaakov. Of course, Yaakov is the Aviv, and Yaakov is his father. So ve'ain Yadua mi meis kodem, and we don't know who died first. So Allah ba'al Morishav, again continuing in the Rashbam, second line now. Al Ruvain ba'al Morishav. So Kagon Ache Ruvain o Ache Yaakov Aviv. So when we say somebody who could cause Ruvain to inherit, we're talking about either the brothers of Ruvain or the brothers of his father Yaakov, she'ein lahem karov yoter mi Ruvain, who don't have a closer relative. The Ruvain roi liyarshan, and Ruvain is an appropriate potential heir. V'haisa alav, and now when it comes to him, meaning, as Rashbam continues, al Ruvain, when it comes to Ruvain, ktubat isha o bal chov, he has either the debt associated with the ketubah or the debt associated with creditors, the aim lo mimashla prua, and he doesn't have what to pay with. And so as a result, if he's the one who dies first, these people are going to be left without anything. Yorshei av omrim habein mate rishon. So the heirs of the father son died first. Benafal abayis alav, when the house fell on Ruvain, Val Aviv, and on his father, Kai, that's what this line is referring to. Sheyorshe Yaakov, the heirs of Yaakov, Kagom Bnei Yaakov, Shimon Levi, like Ruvain's brothers, Shimon and Levi, Ache Ruvain, who are the brothers of Ruvain. Oh, Afilu Chanoch Palu, or maybe even Chanoch and Palu, who were the sons of Bnei Ruvain, who were the sons of Ruvain. Again, the Rashbam is using the appropriate names from Tanakh in the story of Yaakov and his sons and his grandsons, based on the genealogy that's provided in the Chumash. Shagam Haim Yorshe Yaakov, because even those grandsons, those sons of Reuben, are also heirs of Yaakov, and they would say, Omrim Haben Meis Rishon, the son died first. Dahainu Ruvain, namely Dahainu Ruvain Meis Rishon, which merely means that Ruvain died first. Umikoach Avua Da'av, and it's based on the strength of their father's father, Ka'atina. That's why all the assets are coming to them. So the assets aren't coming to them based on their father, but rather their grandfather. Kedamrin and Gemara, as we'll say in the Gemara, V'lo zacha Ruvain bahani nichse klal. And so as a result, Ruvain doesn't inherit anything from these assets. V'nirash anu, but we're going to inherit kol nichse Yaakov, everything that belonged to Yaakov. Ula inyan nafal habayit alav al morishav. Well, what about the case of the house falling on Ruvain and on his other heir, and on somebody who would cause him to inherit? Shayach lemisne yorshe morishav. Yorshe Morishav Omrim Habein Meis Rishon. Then you would just change the terminology, because of course the Mishnah only talks about the father's heirs and doesn't talk about the second case that was referenced, where the house collapsed on Ruvain and on someone else from whom he would inherit. So the Rashbam explains that, yeah, that would work too. So what's the answer? How do we paskin? So that's where Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel come in. Beis Shammai omrim yachloku. Beis Shammai says they divide it. So let's take a look in the Rashbam. Continuing on in the Rashbam. Now we're about 12 lines down in the Rashbam, and maybe 13. Beis Shammai omrim yachloku k'demifarish time of biyavamos, as was explained in Maseches Yevamos. B'hacholetz, in the chapter called Hacholetz. Da'af al gafta yorshei ha'av vada yorshin, that even though that you would say that the heirs of the father are certainly going to be entitled to something, because they are 100% heirs. Behind Mammon income, when it comes to this money, Ubal Chov, and when it comes to the creditor, Suffolk, there's an uncertainty, because after all, the question is did this money ever make it into Ruvain's hands? Because Suffolk umotzi midei vadai, and it seems to be that we're allowing an uncertain claim, the uncertainty associated with whether or not the father died first, to come and take money away from somebody who has a definitive claim, because it doesn't make a difference who dies first for the heirs. Kasavri Beit Shammai Shtar Ha'omed Legabos Kigaboy Dami, that when it comes to Beit Shammai, they think that if you have a document that allows you to collect money, it is as if you already collected the money. This is based on a principle that we saw a little bit yesterday, or similar to a principle, that kol haroi lebiloi biloi la biloi ma'akevet. That when bila la bila ma'akevet, that when you have something that requires mixing, and it's capable of being mixed, well, then the actual mixing will not be viewed as a bar to anything considering happening. Won't be required. Whereas if in fact you didn't have the ability to do the mixing, well, then the mixing would be required. So similarly here, that because you had the ability to take the money based on this document, we're going to treat it as if it was already taken. And therefore, v'tarvayu vade chashivi, and therefore it's as if it's really two certain claims, one against the other. Ubeit Hillel Sovrim back Omrim back in our Mishnah, the Beis Hillel says no. Nechasim b'chezkasan. The property remains in its possession. What does that mean? Back into the Rashbam. B'chezkas yorshei ha'av, in the possession of the heirs of the father. Sharei heim yorshim badai, because they are certainly heirs. Omer Yaakov, Omer Reuben. They'll inherit from somebody. They're going to either inherit from Yaakov or from Reuben. Ukemuchzakin damu. And it's as if they are already holders of the property. Shaharei Yaakov muchzak b'nichasav. Because Yaakov is holding all of these possessions. Haya ve'elu ba'im mikocho, and these other people are all coming through his strength. Ubalchov suffix, whereas the Balchov has an uncertain claim. Vein suffix motzi midei vade, and we're not going to let an uncertain claim take away from a certain claim. So, okay, so now we have these basic principles. So now the Gemara is going to discuss the question of whether one can encumber property that one does not yet own. We are going to talk more now. It's a change in topic, but the reason for the change of topic is because our Mishnah is going to be used as a proof, as an effort to answer this question of whether or not I can encumber future future property that I acquire. Let's go over, though, before we do that, the general principles associated with debt and debt collection. And so let's take a look. We're going to actually do that in a Mishnah. Tanan Hasam Lakama Beget Pashut. Rashbam tells us this is a Mishnah that we're going to see in a couple of weeks. It's on Daf Kuf Ayin Hey 175a, and here is what it says. Again, we're in the Gemara, first line of the Gemara in on Kuf Nun Zayin. After the Mishnah, Hamal ve'es chaveru bishtar. If you lend money to somebody on, through a document, well, then govim and nechasim mishubadim. You have the ability to collect from encumbered properties. What does that mean? Let's take a look in the Rashbam, one line under where it says Gemara in the Rashbam. Hamal ve'es chaveru bishtar afilu lo nichtav bo achriyus. Even if it wasn't written in the document that you have the right to collect from my property, you have the right to collect from encumbered property. Now, let me just back up and just note what we're talking about here. Let's say Stan lends me $1,000. At the time that Stan lends me the money, I have property. We'll call that property A. I then, after I borrow the money, I go and sell that property to Ken. Now, if in fact I borrowed the money from Stan with the document, then we are going to say Ken knows that I borrowed that money. And as a result, he knows that if I fail to pay and he bought that property after the date of the of our agreement, then he is going to have to give up the property. Now, if he bought that property from me the day before our agreement, he would not have to, because he wouldn't. There was no way for him to know that I was borrowing money, so he would not be attributed that knowledge. So that's a very crucial point. And what we're asking about here, and what we're about to ask about, let's get to it, and we'll
still called a lien.
Yes, that would be, he would have a lien on that property. That's exactly right. And as a result, that's what we mean when we say that property is encumbered, that it's encumbered by the lien that he has on that property. So if in fact I borrow money from you using a document, Well, now you have the ability to not just collect from property that I currently hold. Any property I currently hold is certainly available to you, but even property that I've sold after I borrowed the money from you, I would have the ability to you'd have the ability to collect from it. But and let's continue in the Rashbam. Im ein lelova nichasim. If the so again, afilu lo nichta bo achrayas gova. Even though now ordinarily it's supposed to be written in that
Yeah.
document, the fact that you have the ability to collect from encumbered properties. But even if it doesn't go, I'm sorry, afilu lo nichtav po achrayas, even though if it wasn't written in the document, the obligation, the responsibility, go you can still collect from the encumbered properties. Im ein lelov nechasim, if me, the borrower, doesn't have any other assets, b'nei chorin that are available, that free
Right.
to for you to take, govim malva min halukukos. You can grab it from anyone who purchased property from me. De amar b'shnaim oxim, because we said all the way back in the first parak of Bava Metzia, l'rabbanan achrayus shelo nichtav b'shtar to soferhu. That when it comes to the fact that a document doesn't actually mention the fact that the lender has this ability to take property from any purchaser, that is just a scribal error. Ukamisha nichta bodami. And it's as if we read it into the document. Dulo shadi inish
Right.
zuze b'kadi. Because a person doesn't throw money away for nothing.
The document is proof enough.
Exactly. And it's clear that the lender, Stan, certainly wanted for it to be written in the document. Remember, these were in days where not everybody could write, and so you hired a sofer to write it professionally, and he would write it, and he clearly forgot Vita, and he made a mistake. Vistam star kala islay. And this is the important point, which is why Ken will lose if he buys the real estate and then complains that he didn't know. Because we say that a contract, a written document, has a voice, and therefore he's attributed with the knowledge. So, and it's the buyers who've brought this loss on themselves. Shalakhu karkam and halova, because they bought land from me, the borrower. And they didn't make sure to leave with me other land that would allow them to be assured that any of my debts would get paid off. So that the lender should be able to collect from those properties. So, and whereas, as we go back into the Gemara, second line underneath where the Gemara starts after the Mishnah, al yedei edim. However, if it's not a written document, but rather just an oral loan, and all you have are witnesses and no written document, gove minachasim b'nei chorin, then all that Stan will be able to collect from are the properties that are not encumbered. He can't collect from anything that somebody bought from me. He can only collect from the things that I currently have. Okay. So by Shmuel. Shmuel's now going to ask a question, and we're going to try 4 times to answer this question. And we're not going to be successful. So let's see what the question is. De ekne. If I say that not only, if I don't just tell Stan that what I have now will be potentially something he can collect from, if I say anything that I will collect, you can have a lien on that as well. Vikana, and now I acquired new property, Mahu. What's the law? So let's take a look in the Rashbam, and we'll see we're now 1, 2, 3, 6, 8 lines up from in the narrow lines of the Rashbam. By Shmuel, Hakozav lechaveru mishabed ani lecha bechovcha kol nechasim she'ekne. That if I write down into a contract that I have that I am encumbering to pay your loan all property that I will acquire, mahu. What's the law? V'hainu shekosim b'shtaris dikanai u'da'asid ani lamikne, that I have acquired and that I will acquire. And of course, this language, if it sounds a little familiar to you, it's because it's in every tubah. In every ketubah that a husband gives to a wife and is read underneath the chuppah, the obligation to pay that debt, if God forbid the person dies or they get divorced, well, then it's based on the concept of whatever I acquire, whatever I've acquired and will acquire, all of that will go to pay you, my wife, should I need to pay you the debt underneath the ketubah. So that's where that language is, you might recognize. But the point is that here I've written that into my debt document that I'm giving to Stan. So Mahu, what's the answer? And Rashbam explains exactly what our question is. Mi tarif milakukas nechasim shekana halova achar ksivas hashtar umachran laelu. What about now? So now, remember, I owned property A, and then I sold it to Ken. But what if after I borrowed the money from Stan, I bought property B and I sold it to Moshe? So now the question is, and it's a nicer piece of property. And so as a result, Stan, when you're collecting from me, you'd rather collect from Moshe. Are you able to collect from Moshe? Because after all, the question is maybe I can't encumber something that I right now that I don't own. Right. And we would need to do some kind of new transaction for me to encumber that property going forward. So we're going to try 4 times again to answer this question, but we're going to now quickly clarify the question, because Aliba the Rebbe Meir, back in the Gemara, we're 3 lines below where the Gemara start, the 4th line of the Gemara underneath the Mishnah. Aliba de Rebbe Meir de Magna Davar Shalo Ba'olam. Again, remember that Rebbe Meir is the one who says that a person has the ability to convey something that doesn't yet exist in the world. So lo tiboilach. Then there's no question, because I have the ability to convey to Stan, I have the ability to sell Stan this property that I don't yet own. So of course I have the ability to encumber it. So devadai kana, certainly Stan has acquired a lien on that property. Elakiti bailach, what have I? Where is the question really relevant? Aliba de Rabbanan, according to the rabbis, the Amri ein adam makna davar shelo ba'olam, because the rabbis say that you are unable to convey to someone something that does not yet exist in the world. So again, 4 tries at answering this question. So let's scroll the screen so that you can see the efforts. And so effort number 1. Effort number 1 is from Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef Tashma the Chachamim Omrim the Chachamim.
We're going to ask the question: if he buys this property no, he doesn't pay for the entire property. Let's say he pays 5% or 10% down payment. Is that considered encumbered? Is that his, so that the other person can collect, and then he also collects the debt that I still owe to the person from whom I intend to buy it?
Okay, so let's make sure to use names so that way we can make sure we understand the situation. So again, I'll be the borrower, and now I'm going to buy property B from Mark. Okay, again, I own property A. I sold that to you, Ken, after I already owned it when I borrowed the money from Stan, and I sold that to you. Now I buy property B from Mark, and I buy it on some aspect of credit. Let's say he gives me a document that conveys the ownership, and I gave him, $5,000 of the $100,000 that the property is worth. So I owe him $95,000. But for all intents and purposes, that debt, even though, of course, it is a debt against which he can potentially collect from this property is now fully mine. And so as a result, if Stan collects from it, it is b'nei chorin. It is not encumbered property because I'm the 100% owner. Because from a halakhic standpoint, I believe we separate the debt that I owe Mark and this property. And so now the question that we're asking, though, again, is if I then sell property B to Moshe, now Stan is not trying to collect from me, but he's trying to collect from Moshe. It's clear that anything that I own at the time that he's trying to collect, Stan will have the ability to collect from it. But the question of encumbered property is where I then sell a piece of property to someone else. Now, it's no question about the property that you bought from me because I owned that before I borrowed the money and I sold it after I borrowed the money. And so we're going to attribute to you, Ken, the knowledge that you bought it subject to the ability of Stan to collect from it. But when it comes to property B, which I bought from Mark, after I borrowed the money from Stan, there is a question as to whether or not when Moshe buys that property from me, does he do, of course he knows that I have this other loan out there, but is it subject to the property being taken by Stan? Because after all, I didn't acquire it until after I borrowed the money from Stan, so it wasn't officially part of the document that I conveyed to Stan. So maybe we won't say that Stan can collect from it, and we're going to say that he cannot. And that is the question that we're dealing with. So now we're going to try 4 times. So the first thing is from a Mishnah in Ketubot. And the Mishnah is dealing with a situation where, well, you know what? Let's take a look and we'll tell you what the outcome is, and then we'll see what the situation is in the Rashba. So, Tashma, come and hear. This is the answer to your question. The Chachamim say, and this is a disagreement. We'll see what the other opinion is in Rashbam. Zehaya Pikeach. This person was wise, Shemachar lo esakarka, because he sold the land. Because now effectively he can take it as security. So what's that all about? Let's take a look in the last of the medium-wide lines of the Rashbam. Amr Yosef Tashma. D'tanan beperak sheni b'shnei dainei gzeros b'ksubos. So we had in this parak of Shnei Dainai Gzeros on Daf Kuf Yud Amud Aleph of Ksubot, 110a. Hamotzi Shtar Chov Al Chaveiro. If Stan brings out a document that says that I owe him $100,000, Vahala and the other guy, namely me, Hotzi Shtar Shekasav Bo Shemachar Lo Es Sadeh Mal Velalova. I bring out a document that says that Stan stole me his field, we'll call it Stanistan, and he sold it to me after Achar Shenichtav Hashtarchov, after he wrote this, after the document of the debt. And I say, what? Stan wouldn't sell me land if I owed him money. He would have said, you owe me money, give me the money. Because people in general don't sell land unless they need the money. Shahu motzi alav, and again, it was written after the date. The sale was after the date of the document that Stan has brought out to try and claim for me. So Admon says Yochel halova litaon, that the borrower, namely me, can say to Stan, Ilu chayev hayiti lecha, if I were really obligated to owe you money, you should have taken your money, mimeni, from me. And you shouldn't have sold me any land. Because just because you needed money, you should have taken the money from me as a debt. And what do the Chachamim say on that? The Chachamim omrim zeh hamalve haya pikeach. This lender, Stan, was actually brilliant for selling me the piece of property. Shemachar lo lelova es hakarka, that you sold me the property. Because shehu yachol ata lemashkano, because now you can take that property as collateral. Ba'ad chovo, for the loan. V'lo yachol lidchoso, and I'm not going to be able to push you away. V'lomar, and say, ein li lifroa klum. I have no money because you know I have money because you know I have your field. So v'hine zeh karka the ikne, and now so seems to be the land that I will acquire. Hava achar nichtav ashtar. It's after the writing of the contract. Kana o halova zman meruba v'hine zeh hamalva chozer v'gova b'chovo. Alma de ikne v'kani mishtabit halamalva. So we see that this property, which I acquired from Stan only after I borrowed the money from Stan, is subject to being collected by Stan. And so as a result, clearly, if I were to say the property that I'm going to acquire in the future is going to be subject to encumbrance if I were to sell it to somebody else, clearly the answer is yes. So maybe not so. So Amrle Rava says, Mine Kamar, 1 second. Stan would be collecting that property that he sold me directly from me. Mine afilu niglima al dal kasvei. When it comes to the collecting away from me, Stan has the ability to collect from the shirt on my back. Kikami Bailan. So 1 second, and where's our question? De ekne kana umachar. No, what if I buy the property and then sell it to Moshe? Remember, that's where the situation. Or de ekne kana v'horish. Or if admeya ve'esrim, I were to acquire something and then cause it to be bequeathed. So that's the situation. So as a result, our first answer is rejected. We need to come up with another approach. And Rav Chana comes to the rescue with approach number 2. So Rav Chana, Tashma, come and listen, and come here, and you'll get the answer. And you know where it's from? It's our Mishnah. And of course, this is why this Gemara is brought right here, right after our Mishnah. So this is perfect. So Tashma, Nafal Habayas Alav Alaviv. The house fell on the father, on the son and the father. Va'alav Al Morishav, or on the son and his heir, and somebody who would cause him to inherit. V'hayza Alav Ktuba Isha Uvalcho, and there was a claim by the wife and or creditors. Yorshei ha'av omrim, the father's heirs say, haben meis rishon va'achar kach meis ha'av ubale ha'chovos omrim ha'av meis rishon. Right. So the point is we have this disagreement. But what's the point? What's happening here, such that it would matter? The creditors are saying, listen, really the father died first. So Yaakov died first.
Right.
Then it went to Ruvain. And now what happened to this property? Ruvain also died. So it now goes to Ruvain's sons. And so I want to, as the creditor of Ruvain, I want to be able to collect from his sons. But when did Ruvain acquire this property? Only a second earlier, when his father died, a second before him. So, and clearly that's after I loaned Ruvain the money. So as a result, it's clear in this case, isn't it, that Ruvain is acquiring something after I loaned him the money and then bequeathing it to somebody else, and yet I'm arguing that I should be able to collect. So doesn't that mean that that I have the ability to convey that to somebody else? So v'isal kadaitak de ekne kana umachar de ekne kana v'horish lo mishtabed. And if you were to say that when Ruvain says whatever I acquire and then sell, or whatever I acquire and then bequeath, does not have a lien against it, nehi nami de av meis berisha. Who cares if the father died first? Why would I want the father to die first? It doesn't make a difference, because the Ruvain didn't acquire it until after I made the loan to him. And so as a result, it would not be nehi nami de av meis berisha de eknehu. It's something that's going to be acquired. And so as a result, clearly this shows that a debtor does have the power to encumber property that he hasn't yet acquired. So Amrle Rav Nachman,
What difference does it make who died first? Obviously Reuven got the loan or made the loan before either he or his father died.
yes, exactly. And so if you're going, so the point is that if in fact we were to say that one cannot encumber property that one acquires in the future, then as a claimant, I wouldn't care whether Reuven died first or Yaakov died first, because even if Yaakov died first, the property that Reuven acquired only came later. He can't encumber it. And so as a result, it was never encumbered. And therefore, I will not be able to collect from Reuven's heirs, period. It doesn't make a difference which of them dies first. And yet in our Mishnah, I make the argument that I want the father to die first, so now Reuven has assets. But according to if we were to answer the question that I can't encumber property that I will acquire in the future, well, then it wouldn't make a difference, and I wouldn't be able to take that property away from Reuven's heirs. So therefore, it must be that Reuven does have the ability to encumber property that he will acquire. So Amrle Rav Nachman says, no, it does not necessarily prove that. Ze'ira Chavran Tirgama, because Ze'ira, our friend, explained this situation, mitzvah al hayisomim lifroa chovas abihen, that this is not based on some special encumbrance that I have, but it's based on the fact that the heirs of Reuven have an obligation to pay Reuven's debts. And therefore, that's why it's going to be. But so in second, is that really true? Maskif Rav Ashi said, Malva al Pehu. 1 second. That ability is to the obligation of the heirs to pay is really just an oral obligation, meaning there's no document that records the children's obligations to pay the debts of the father. And so as a result, the Rav Shmuel to Amri Tarvayu, Mal Va'apeh, Eno Gove, Lo Min Yorshin, Velo Min Alakuchos. And when it comes to loans, you don't get to inherit, you don't get to take from heirs or from purchasers. Meaning it's treated just like an oral loan. And so as a result, you shouldn't be able to do this. As we turn to Kufnan Zion Mabet,
Aren't we talking about a written star here?
Well, we do have a written star underneath it, but the obligation in that star is from Reuven, not from Reuven's heirs. And so as a result, the point is that Reuven has the when the creditor tries to collect from Reuven, he has a written document. But when Reuven no longer exists because he's passed away, well, then the obligation of the children to pay the debts of their father, that's really effectively an oral loan. So as a result,
why is that? Don't they also inherit the documents that we learned earlier
remember,
that
the document is not in the possession of the debtor, it's in the possession of the creditor. The creditor, now you may be thinking, oh, the creditor's heirs will be able to collect using that document. Absolutely, and you're correct. But the creditor and the creditor's heirs who have the document, that document only has the name of Reuven in it. It does not have the name of Reuven's children in it. And so as a result, the loan from the children's perspective, that loan is now an oral loan. Okay.
but we learned earlier, didn't we, that the creditor can collect from the estate of the person that is
That's
deceased,
correct.
right?
That just because it's an oral loan doesn't mean that it can't be collected. It can be collected only directly from the heirs. It can't be collected from property that the heirs were to sell. Or so that's exactly right. You're 100% correct that they can collect from the heirs directly, but they can't collect. But now, if those heirs sell that property to Moshe, Moshe is not obligated to give up that property to the creditors because Moshe bought it from the heirs, not from the debtor himself. Okay,
Well, how do
so
we get to that? That he bought the property from the heirs. We were saying that. I
because we're
mean,
talking about encumbered property. So the point is that uh
but we were talking about property that Reuven would acquire or bought and so forth, and then he sold. How do we get to the point that the heirs suddenly sold the property or bought the property, whatever they did, because Reuven died in the fire or in the building collapse? So the heirs, until they adjudicate this, how do we get to the point that the heirs suddenly decide to buy or sell property? We were
Right,
talking
because the
about.
point is the point is we're trying to ask the question of whether or not there's an obligation to pay income from encumbered property. And the point is that the obligation that the heirs have is a separate obligation and doesn't answer the question of whether or not you can encumber future acquired property.
Well, wasn't theirs in the first place. I
I'm
mean,
sorry.
it wasn't theirs in the first
That's
place.
true. It wasn't theirs
It
in the
was
first place.
Reuben's. It was Reuben's. So
Yes,
when we were
that's true.
discussing whether he sold or died, and then he died. So now the heirs. So where does how do we get to the point that, oh, now the heirs are selling property that they acquired from his money? I mean, it's a jump. We're jumping to another
No, because remember,
situation.
what's the question that we asked is, do I have the ability to encumber property that I will acquire in the future? And the encumbrance only applies if I then buy and then sell that property or cause that property to be inherited. All right. So that's the question that we're asking. And we tried to bring a proof from our Mishnah because in our Mishnah, the creditor says that the father died first, so that as a result, Ruvain ended up with assets. And now that Ruvain has the assets, I can collect from them, except that those assets, Ruvain has also died. And so now those assets are with the heirs. So I might have thought that that shows that Ruvain can encumber future assets. But the answer to the question is it doesn't work because the obligation that Ruvain has is only that Reuven's heirs have is a direct obligation. It's not an obligation from the because they have an obligation to pay their father's loans, and so it's not an obligation on it's not an obligation as a result of an encumbrance. It's a direct obligation. And now
Nami, but you're
Ravashi,
raising the point. What you raised there is that the heirs may have sold the property. How do you get to the point that the heirs are now selling the property?
so
Yeah, I
no,
understand
that's
everything what you're
based.
saying, but
Okay,
up to this point, that ain't Nami, that we're talking about property that
so then
Reuven may have
ignore the
sold and
fact
so
that the
forth. But
heirs
how do
sold the
you get
property.
to the
That's
point
fine.
that
You don't. We
the
don't need
heirs
to
don't have
get
the
there.
right? The heirs
We
don't
don't
have
need
the
to
right.
get there. We don't need to get there. So again, and so but then Rav Ashi says, you know what? Even if the heirs have a direct obligation, that is not a problem for us because if in fact the heirs had a direct obligation, their obligation is only an oral obligation, but we're collecting the land itself because an oral obligation doesn't have the ability to collect directly. But we are going to say that he can collect directly the property, and so doesn't that show again that in fact we've now brought a proof? Again, Rav Ashi is asking on Rav Nachman and saying that because the right to collect from the heirs is an oral loan, so which both Rav and Shmuel say the creditor cannot collect from heirs or purchasers. So why should that allow this person to collect? So no, in fact, your response, Rav Nachman, is wrong, and Rav Chana's answer is correct. But Rav Ashi now offers at the top of Kufnan Zayin Amabet a second rejoinder to Rav Chana's answer and says, no, it's not a good proof. Elaha money, Rebbe Meir, that in fact our Mishnah is Rebbe Meir. The Amar Adam Magna Davar Shalo Bala Olam, right? And we have that. We in fact have this principle that a Stam Mishnah Rebbe Meir, and so this is all based on Rebbe Meir's viewpoint. Well, I guess because we have the machlokas of Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, but the point is that maybe this is all according to Rebbe Meir. And so as a result, Rebbe Meir again is the one who says that you can cause somebody you can convey to someone something that hasn't yet come into the world. And so as a result, it's no longer a proof to the question because our question was only according to the rabbis. And we're going to get used to this answer because we're going to have this same answer for the next two questions as well. Because Amar of Yaakov, now picking up on the second line, Amar of Yaakov Minahar Pekod, who's from Nahar Pekod, Mishmei de Ravina, who said in the name of Ravina, Tashma, listen to the following. Doesn't the following Mishnah, which is a Mishnah in Shvius, Parak Yud, Mishnah Hey, Ucharin Ksherim. I'm sorry, Shtarechov Hamukdamim Psulin. That when it comes to a Shtarchov, a debt document, if you were to write an earlier date, it would be a puzzle contract. Why would it be a puzzle contract? Because effectively, Ken bought the property from me 2 days before I borrowed the money from Stan. There was no way for Ken to know about my loan. But if Stan writes in the loan document that he made the loan to me a month ago, well, now all of a sudden the loan document makes it look like Ken should have known that there was a loan, and Stan would be able to collect from Ken. Well, we don't want that to be able to happen. So that's going to be a puzzle contract. But hamucharin ksherim. But if you post date the document, it would be fine. Now, of course, when it comes to Ken's purchase, that it doesn't make a difference. But ve'isal kadaktik de ekne kanu umachar de ekne kanu v'horish lo mishdabid. But if you tell me that when I acquire something in the future, it is not subject to the encumbrance, well, then it makes a humongous difference if I post date a document. Because if I post date a document, let's say I buy land from Mark on February 1st, and I borrowed the money from Stan on January 15th. But if instead we post date it to February 15th, now all of a sudden, when Moshe buys the property from me on March 1st, now he's going to be subject to the loan because because it looks like I bought the land before I made the loan. But if I in fact bought the land only after I made the loan, then it wouldn't be subject to the encumbrance. So Meicharin Amai Ksherim, why are we allowing a post-dated contract? De eknehu, that's the kind of situation where we would say that it's something that I'm going to acquire. So again, the Gemara answers, Hamani Rebbe Meir he Damar Adam Makna Davar Sha'alola Bala Olam. It's Rebbe Meir who says that you can convey it. And so again, this Mishnah is not according to the rabbis, and therefore is going to be consistent with that, with the approach of Rebbe Meir. Fourth and final, Amar of Misharshia, Mishmei de Rava, Tashma, Lishvach Karkaos Ketzad. What's the situation of an improvement in land? Well, let's quickly jump into the Rashbam here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, end of the 6 medium wide line in the Rashbam. L'sheva karkos ketzad. But Mesechas Gittin, in Mesechas Gittin, Daf Mem Chedem Bet, Tanan, we learned the following. Ein motzian la'achilas peiros u'l'sheva karkos u'lamazon ha'isha v'habanos. That we don't allow somebody to collect from encumbered property. So if I have a debt for any of these reasons, and we're not going to allow that creditor to collect from somebody who bought property from me. because again, we want the world to work right. We want the world to work nicely. We're not going to allow that to happen. Now, what is the reference to Lesheva Karkos? So so now we go back into the Gemara, and the Gemara tells us what this is. So again, we're now 9 lines down towards the end of the line. Lesheva karkos ketzad. What is meant by an improvement of land? We're dealing with the following situation. Haresha makar sadeh lechavero v'hishpicha. I sell a field to Ken, and Ken creates improvements on it. Uva valchov utrafa. And Stan, my creditor, comes and he takes it away from Ken. Kishahu Gova, when he takes it away from Ken, Gova es Karen Menachasim Mishuba. So now, Kishahu Gova, excuse me, when Ken now comes and I owe Ken the money that he bought that field for. So let's say he bought the field for $100,000, and Stan improved it so it was worth $110,000. I owed Stan $110,000. Stan takes the field. That's how we're going to understand it at the moment. And so now I owe Ken $110,000, $100,000 of the purchase price and $10,000 for the improvement. So kishahu gova, when you can come and claim it from me, gova es hakerem minachasim mishubadim. You can go collect from the $100,000. You can collect that even from encumbered property. Meaning, if I sold another piece of property to Moshe, then you'd be able to go to Moshe and collect it from him. But when it comes to the $10,000 of improvement, that you can only collect from things that I currently hold. You cannot collect, meaning it's only from unencumbered properties. Anything I sell, you wouldn't be able to collect from it. So now we finish the proof. And if you want to say that when I try to, if I say that something that I will acquire and sell or acquire and then cause to be bequeathed, that it is not subject to an encumbrance, well then balchov amai gova shvacha. Why should Stan be able to take any of the improvement, right? The improvement that Ken made on the property that I sold to him is something in the future. You should have no right to collect any of that, Stan, if we say that future things can't be encumbered. So Balchov amai gova shvacha. Why are we allowing the creditor Stan in this situation to collect from the improvement? Well, of course, again, third and final time, and as a rejection of our fourth effort, Hamani Rebbe Meir here. We can say that this is also Rebbe Meir. We can say that a person cannot convey something who Rebbe Meir says that a person does have the ability to convey something that doesn't yet exist in the world, and that's why we're going to say that I was able to effectively convey to Stan, my creditor, the right to collect even from improvements on the property that Ken made after he bought it from me. So we have not answered this, okay? So the bottom line is...
Maybe I'm missing something. Why is Stan entitled to the extra $10,000? The loan to him was $100,000, right?
No, I said $110,000. I said $110,000.
Oh, you did say it was $110,000.
Yeah.
Oh.
So no, you're 100% right. If he was only 100,000, he wouldn't be entitled to it. You're absolutely right. But the loan was exactly thanks to you. You improved the land by but now we're going to see that it was not so simple. And in fact, Stan is not going to get all of that. Imtim Selomer. Now the question that we're about to say is the following: if you want to say that in fact the ekne kana umachar, the ekne kana v'horish lo mishtabed, halo mishtabed. All right. Well, let's put aside on one side that if in fact you tell me that it doesn't work for me to try to encumber a future acquisition, fine, it doesn't work. But now let's assume that it does work. because then I have another question for you. And all right, because imtim salom mishtabe, but if I say that it does work, lava v'lava v'chazer v'kana, if I borrowed from Stan and told him that everything that I will acquire was going to be subject to a loan to you. And then I borrow from Ken, and I say that everything that's subject to that I acquire is going to be subject to a encumbrance for you. Mahu lakama mishtabed, and is a lien primarily for Stan's benefit, who was my first creditor, or labasra mishtabed, or do we say no? I was really rejecting and canceling my first one, and I was only on the second one. And again, I borrowed money from Stan on January 1st, Ken on January 15th, and I bought the property and then sold it to Moshe in February. So all of that is the situation. What do I say about that? So Amar Rav Nachman Hamilsa Ibailan. We asked them in Israel. We asked them, meaning the people in Israel, the Shulchu Mitam, and they sent from over there, meaning from Israel, Rishon Kana, and they said in Israel that actually the first one acquires. So Stan wins everything. Rav Huna Amar Yachloku. Rav Huna says, no, you divide it. And Rashbam explains, 1, 2, 3, 5 lines down in the wide lines of the Rashbam, Kol Echad Lefi Ma'osav. Each one gets based on the money that they contributed. So if I borrowed $100,000 from Stan and $200,000 from Ken, Ken would get 2/3 of the property, and Stan would get 1/3 of the property. Because the answer is that the shibud, that when I bought the property from Mark, the obligation that's associated with that property came into being, now that I own the property, at the exact same moment for both Stan and Ken. Okay, Shaharei Achar Beis Ha'alvos Kana, because it was only after I made both acquisitions that I acquired the property. Uba'osa ha'es, and at that moment, shekana'a, that I acquired it, miyan nishtabdu lishnehen, I became the property became encumbered to both of them. She'ein kedima le'echad mehem. So there is no first and second, because it was only at that same moment that it all became subject to the lien.
Did he borrow the money? Did you borrow the money with the intent of buying the property? That's why you bought, because you needed the money to buy that
it
property.
doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. That's not a relevant factor in the calculus. V'chein tani Rabbi Bar Avua yachloku, and similarly, Rabbi Bar Avua says yachloku. Ravina madura kama de Rav Ashi amar lan rishon kana madura basar de Rav Ashi amar la yachloku. Originally, Rav Ashi said that it was the first one acquires, but then on reflection, he decided the second one acquires. V'hilchasa yachloku, and the halacha is that they divide it. So, Meisvei, quick question. 1 second. You're telling me that any later, if I borrow from Stan, and then I borrow from Ken, and then I buy land, the ability of Stan and Ken to take that land is a yachloku situation. What about the situation that we were just talking about? L'sheva kartzakaos ketzad. When we said that the improvement, what's the story of the improvement? Haresha machar sada lechaver v'hishpicha. Right? I sold the land to Ken, and Ken improved it. Uva balchov, and my creditor comes, the tarfa, and Stan comes and takes it because he's owned 110,000. It was Ken bought it for 100,000, improved it by 10,000, and now it's worth 110,000. Kishahu Gova as a Karen, and now when Ken tries to collect from me, because now Ken is also my creditor, Gova as a Karen Minachasim Mishubadim, he can collect $100,000 from encumbered properties. That's a shvach. But he can only collect the improvement for the improvement, the 10,000. He can only collect from unencumbered properties. Well, 1 second, ve'im isa chatzi shvach mi baile. But 1 second, this appreciation, when did it happen? It happened after Ken bought the property. Well, once Ken bought the property, he is effectively a creditor of mine, because Ken has a contingent right against me of collecting the money that I owe him for A, the underlying property, if you take it away, Stan, and B, for any improvement. Well, this shouldn't Ken effectively have a lien on the improvement, which is a later acquired item relative to the two loans to the two of you. So actually, and the Isa Chatzi Shevach mi Baile, he should only be able to take half. So my Gova Nami de Katani Chatzi Mishvach. So in fact, absolutely, that's exactly correct. When we said that Stan gets the 110,000, we were not being precise. That the Gemara has effectively changed that. Stan would end up with 105,000 out of the property, and Ken would end up with 5,000 out of the property. And so as a result, they would end up, it might actually be 109,000 and 1,000 because again, based on the ratios and Stan and the size of each of their debt. But the bottom line is that additional property is in fact subject to splitting between Stan and Ken. And
Wait, the
so we'll
Shvach?
stop
Is that
there.
you're saying
And that
just
brings
the
us to
Shvach?
what?
Just the Shvach is
Just the Shvach, because remember the when it came to the underlying asset, that Stan had a claim on before you came into the picture, Ken. And so as a result, he has the primary claim on the underlying property. But when it comes to the improvement in the property, that came only later, and it came after you became effectively a creditor of mine. And so as a result, when it comes to that improvement, you have an equal right to that improvement as Stan does.
but you also said I bought the property, right? I'm a creditor and I bought the property.
Well, because you bought the property subject to my loan to Stan, you are like a creditor. You are a contingent creditor, right? If in fact Stan comes and takes it from you, my agreement with you is to pay you back for the money that you paid to buy the purchase price of the property and to pay for any improvements that you would lose.
But I was already a creditor, right? Didn't you borrow money from me?
No, I never borrowed money from
You
you.
said there were two people. You borrowed from one, borrowed from a second one.
That's a separate case.
Oh.
That was the case that we used to set up the situation, right? That was the case that we said that's the question. That was Rav Nachman. Remember, we asked what happens if you have two borrowers, right? Number one and number two. And we then said that in that situation, future acquired property gets divided between those two borrowers. Once we said that, we then looked back at the situation of you buying the property from me and improving it and said, why should Stan get to take all of the improvement away from you? Shouldn't he have to split that with you? And the answer is yes, in fact, he has to split it with you. All right, I'm going to stop the recording, and if it's still not clear, we can talk about it further. All right, have a wonderful, wonderful Shabbos. Looking forward to continuing our learning together.
Well, why couldn't we?